The blade of the knife gleamed under the cold light of the chandelier, sharp and shimmering like the flicker of betrayal stabbing through my heart. I held it unsteadily, my fingers trembling, the stark contrast of the polished steel against my skin, sending a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. The scent of expensive perfume suffocated the air around me, an intoxicating mix of jasmine and sandalwood. The signature scent he loved so much, now a cruel reminder that I had been living a lie. As I looked down at the pristine cake before me, perfectly frosted and adorned with delicate flowers, I was struck by its beauty, a facade that masked the festering betrayal beneath. This was no ordinary cake. It was a celebration. His celebration. The air swirled with the laughter of guests, but all I could hear was the deafening silence of my racing heart. Each chuckle and cheer fell around me like confetti, bright and cheerful, while my insides twisted into knots. In that moment, the world fell away until there was only me and the revelation that shattered my reality. Suddenly, I felt a warmth brushing against my skin, almost igniting the cold dread coiling in my stomach. I glanced down and saw the glimmer of the diamond necklace he had gifted me years ago, still hanging around my neck, its weight suddenly feeling suffocating. I had thought of it as a symbol of love, a token of our life together. But now, it felt like an anchor, a reminder of the weight of the betrayal I was about to uncover. It was only last week, the golden morning light streaming through our kitchen window as I prepared breakfast, that I had sensed the first tremors of unease. The scent of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, mingling with the buttery aroma of pancakes sizzling on the griddle. I had watched him across the table, his laughter spilling like syrup, sweet and sticky enough to glue me into complacency. "You're the best wife, babe," he had said, leaning over to peck my cheek, his warm breath brushing against my skin, a sweet lie that made my heart flutter. But with it had come a nagging sensation, a familiar ache that clawed at my insides. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way he had started dressing sharper, the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't mine. I shook my head, shaking off the thoughts as I served him a stack of pancakes, golden and fluffy, the centerpiece of our little morning ritual. "Just my insecurities," I had whispered to myself, a mantra that echoed against the clinking of forks and the gentle hum of the morning news. Now, every pancake I cooked, every cup of coffee I poured, felt like heavy stones I had carried through an unbearable storm. I had invested everything into his success, my time, my energy, my youth. I remembered how I had scraped together every penny I could find, how I had survived on instant noodles so he could eat caviar at business meetings, the sacrifices piled like burnt toast, charred reminders of what I had traded for our picture-perfect life. It wasn't until last night, while I was flipping through his phone to find some old pictures, that the illusion shattered. His phone buzzed insistently, breaking through the dull hum of our silent house. The name that lit the screen made my heart stop. Samantha. A name I had never heard before. A name that felt foreign and sharp against my tongue. The messages glowed with a flirtatious intimacy that curled around my throat like a noose. "When can I see you again?" it pined. "You're everything I've ever wanted." My stomach flipped, nausea clawing up into my throat as I staggered back, that familiar despair washing over me like icy water. The weight of the betrayal cocooned me, trapping me in a realm where love turned to ash and hope crumbled into dust. I felt rage bubbling up, hot and bright, as if that fire could incinerate the hurt, each message blazing with the truth that he had seen me not as a partner, but as an old cash cow grazing in the fading glow of his stardom. And here I stood now, knife trembling in hand, as it all came crashing down. My breath came shallow, the air thick with disbelief. It was happening, not just a discovery, but an awakening. The moment the mask fell, and I realized my husband, my partner, my love had so cruelly dismissed me, I breathed deeply, inhaling the sweet scent of the cake mixed with the acrid bitterness of my own tears. The laughter of guests nearby mocked my trauma, but I pressed on, adrenaline surging, sharpening my thoughts as I prepared to face the truth head-on. It was time for me to pull back the curtain on their deceit and expose the fragile threads that held our lives together. My heart pounded as I huddled close to the cake, my eyes darting around the elegantly decorated room filled with glimmering lights and people in their finest attire. As the evening light filtered through the tall windows, it cast long shadows, just like the shadow of doubt that had loomed over me for so long. Yet every twisted vision of my marriage sharpened my resolve, and a wicked thrill danced through my veins. I was tired of being the woman relegated to the sidelines of my own life. With a roar, I thrust the knife into the cake, cutting through the layers with a satisfying crunch, unleashing the spongy softness hidden within. The guests gasped, their laughter dying in their throats as I began speaking, my voice trembling but resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. It seems my husband has been straying beyond the boundaries of our marriage." Gasps littered the room, the air thick with shock and disbelief. My pulse quickened, the adrenaline firing each nerve as I stepped into the spotlight I had always shied away from. My husband's face turned white, a mask of panic as he turned to me, ready to deflect, to allure, to charm. But I was no longer in his thrall. The chains had fallen away. "They believed my kindness was weakness," I continued, my voice rising with conviction, "that because I stood by his side, I was not worthy of respect. They confused my sacrifices for his success as a sign that I was just an old cash cow, meant to be milked until I had nothing left to give." I locked eyes with him, a storm brewing in my chest. I'm not a pasture beast. I am the future he neglected, and it's time that future bites back. Fingers trembling, dignity rising like a phoenix, I reached into my purse, retrieving the flurry of photographs I had printed out, detailing our lives together, the joy we used to share. But I had also printed out those flirty messages from his phone, sealed in black and white, stark against the memories blurred by betrayal. "You had your fun," I declared, brandishing the photographs as if they were swords. "Now watch what happens when the tables are turned." Before he could sputter an excuse, I exposed the text to the audience, a hushed rush of gasps swelling like a tide. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every woman who has been cast aside, who has been treated like a mere stepping stone on someone else's path to glory. The air crackled with tension as I spoke, that familiar heat washing over me once again, the fire of justifiable vengeance igniting my resolve. He stepped forward, desperate to preserve his image, his voice strained. "You're overreacting. You're being delusional." The words dripped with toxicity, desperate gaslighting. "You've always been overdramatic, babe." But the room turned, and I drew strength from the collective gasp that blanketed us all. "No more," I declared, breathing deeply, steadying my rising anger. "Your lies may have worked before, but now I have the power to rewrite my story." With a sudden and shocking clarity, I pressed the button to the projector behind me, illuminating the room with the stark evidence of his deceit. "You want to discredit me? Let the world see the truth." Each photo flickered across the screen, the charade collapsing upon itself as those once laughing faces morphed into expressions of pity and disbelief. My husband's mask shattered, confusion knitting his brow, desperation igniting the fear in his eyes. "Where he saw opportunity, I saw only sacrifice," I continued, the crowd reflecting my determination. "But I stand here today not to mourn the life I thought we had built, but to reclaim my spirit and my worth." I glanced at the screen, at the victimization I had endured. They may have thought I was just an old cash cow, but I did not just give blindly. Every sacrifice was an investment, and now I choose to withdraw. A stillness wrapped around the room, electric, as if every person present was holding their breath in anticipation, the gravity of the truth settling in. The whispers started, almost like a murmured agreement as they processed the layers of betrayal unfolding before them. "If you want to see how this wife destroys the traitor, subscribe now." My voice firm, confident, I pressed my lips together to silence the tremor of fear, knowing full well this was just the beginning of a battle I intended to win. The aftermath of my revelation left a lingering hum, a vibrating knot of power and uncertainty that coursed through me like electricity. Anyone watching would assume I had unlocked a door to freedom, yet the path ahead was fraught with shadows, particularly the familiar face tucked behind a thin veneer of charm and betrayal. I was no longer just a woman scorned. I was a thief in my own home, sneaking past the threat that lurked disguised in the suits and colognes I had once adored. As the evening unfolded, I returned to the beautiful, sun-drenched living room that had played host to so many cherished memories. Now, it felt like a museum of my former self, captured smiles preserved in gilded frames that whispered secrets of warmth and laughter. The floral arrangements, crisp and alluring, clashed with the bitterness that curled at the edges of my senses. Sweet notes of peonies mingled with an undercurrent of mildew, a scent that mocked my very being, a poignant reminder that under beauty lies decay. I padded silently across the plush Persian rug, its intricate pattern swirling beneath my bare feet like the decaying edges of my heart. He was in the study, the looming double doors partially ajar, and I caught glimpses of him, hunched over a desk piled high with the papers of his empire. My heart raced. His body was there, but a ghost had settled behind his eyes, a treacherous shadow that lingered since the affair was exposed. "Darling, you really should think about getting some help," he called out, each syllable soaked in condescension, as though he were soliciting concern rather than offering it. The contours of his voice twisted in the air, slithering around my shoulders like a noose. "You're not yourself lately." All at once, the weight began to settle on me again, inching into the corners of my mind. Questions flickered, making it almost too easy to question my own sanity. Am I overreacting? Did I imagine the betrayal? The sudden burning scent of sandalwood wafting from his cologne, the one I had associated with devotion, now stung my nostrils, making warmth gather behind my eyes. "I'm fine," I replied, injecting my tone with the trace of defiance I so desperately clung to amidst the chaos. But were the shadows of doubt sprouting fresh roots in my mind? How many times had I second-guessed myself? The intimate words exchanged in the darkness of the night now echoed in my head, morphing into a wild cacophony of blurs and uncertainties. Had I been crazy to trust him? Had he, in turn, systematically orchestrated my unraveling? While the gaslighting seeped slowly into my bones like a creeping vine, I turned to the only sanctuary I had left, the relentless pursuit of truth, the need to gather shards of evidence that could pierce through the thick fog he had wrapped around my reality. I had to confirm what I already knew in my heart, so I began devising a plan that would require cunning and patience, traits I had long buried while supporting his rise as the center of our world. Afternoons turned into furtive nights, as I became a ghost in my own home, clandestinely maneuvering through rooms. My evenings were twisted into a delicate dance, tiptoeing around his prying eyes while gathering relics of his deception. Every email became more than just a timestamp of our shared life. They became relics to scour for traces of doubt, breadcrumbs leading me to the truth. I started collecting bank statements, meticulously hidden in the top drawer of his desk, the faint scent of mahogany guiding me to the spot where I could find parts of him buried. Each number turned into a brick in the wall of guilt I would soon lay out before him, each expense screaming of extravagance I'd suspected all along. Imagine shelling out for artisanal wines at upscale bistros, meals where I had sat silently sipping water as he merited potlucks and affairs with beautiful women, whose trust funds might, I surmised, stretch beyond my reach. "We're still together. Why do we need these fancy dinners?" I would whisper to the walls, only to find them resonating whispers of my own vulnerability, no one to hear. Sometimes, I'd gather his clothes from the dry cleaners, inhaling the perfume of unworn cologne, clearly evidence that he had entertained someone other than me in his silk-lined world. One late evening, as I rifled through my old personal belongings, I unearthed my college photo album, the pages dog-eared and worn. The faint smell of musty memories enveloped me, and a tingle of nostalgia washed over. It was in those carefree, pre-marital days that I had dreamt of launching my own business, of stepping instead into shoes lined with ambition instead of somebody's shadow. The distant chiming of a clock echoed through the stillness, and just then, it occurred to me that I needed an ally, someone to guide me through the fog that he had cast over my clarity. Ellen, my college roommate, blossomed into that lifeline, her supportive spirit always steady, an understanding that grew with every nervous message exchanged. The glass of red wine I sipped while we talked mirrored the warmth of her laughter, and the sharpness of her words took form in beautiful, bold colors. I should have been the steel driving the dagger into the heart of betrayal, not softening the edges of my wound in silence. "Stay focused. Don't let him shake you," she urged, her hands animatedly slicing through the air, capturing the vivid embers of my weakness. "Remember who you are and what he reduced you to. You're made of more than tears and sorrow. You can rise." The warmth of her encouragement melted the icy barriers protecting my heart, and even through the echoing doubts, I felt emboldened. We decided to arrange a meeting with a lawyer. Every detail of my emotional warfare boiled into practicality. I realized this was more than just revenge. It was about reclaiming my identity, a stepping stone to resuscitating the future I had long ago tucked away beneath a mountain of neglect. As I sat down with the lawyer, the smell of freshly brewed coffee permeating the air mingled with the rich leather of the seats. She exuded wisdom, her calm demeanor grounding me amidst the chaos circling my mind like a whirlwind. As she began to lay out possible actions, the gravity of her words wrapped around my chest, pulling me in, whispering secrets of anticipation. "Start gathering everything," she advised, offering a moment's reprieve as she rifled through the stack of files laid on her desk, each a symbol of urgency. "Bank statements, photos, those messages you found. You need proof, a clear roadmap of his deceit, or at the very least, the means to reclaim your dignity." Upon returning home, a steel resolve hardened within me, mixed nervously with trepidation. The nights of quiet retrieval against the backdrop of a once-loving sanctuary renewed my spirit. I collected each detail, ensured every transaction was documented, every chat saved, lined with strings of the truth, and peppered with the lies that had defined so long my love. I became an architect within my own home, designing a framework drenched in the truth beneath the surface of betrayal, and betrayal's cloak of silence. Day by day, I built an arsenal to shatter his facade, waking through my nights with the thrill of impending justice breathing on my neck, the electric air igniting senses that had dulled under layers of denial. I clutched the evidence close, wrapped in elastic bands, tucked beneath my foundation like secrets waiting to erupt. Each whispered message I'd unearthed felt like holding a fragment of victory, the darkened shadows steadily retreating as light began to break through the dimness. I'd spent too many years being made to feel inferior, a mere cash cow to fuel his ambitions. Finally, I felt alive again, caught in the exhilarating gleam of self-discovery. A wave of embers from my soul sparked brighter each day, every step edging closer to reclaim the narrative that he had sought to write for me. The war that had quietly unfurled beneath my very roof was only just beginning, and I would no longer be the woman silenced by deceit. That day marked a turning point, a pledge to rise from the ashes. I was weaving a new story, one that would reclaim the life crafted from ashes, a life built not on betrayal, but on the pillars of truth, strength, and fiery determination. The evening arrived with a burst of unexpected cheerfulness, yet beneath the surface lay a current of tension, thick enough to choke my throat. It was his birthday, a celebration that had once held the warmth of our union, but now simmered with grim irony. The grand ballroom was draped in opulence, adorned with flickering candles casting a golden glow against the polished mahogany tables, all surrounded by crystal vases bursting with white roses and deep red dahlias. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with the faint, sweet aroma of vanilla and chocolate from the cake, a sinister mix, a haunting promise of my intentions. As laughter filled the room, I stood just outside the entrance, adorned in a fitted navy dress that caressed my curves, its fabric smooth and soft against my skin. I brushed my fingers against the silk, reminding myself of the power I held, the control I was about to seize. The murmurs in the air felt like electric waves. Every chuckle and toast thrummed with disbelief in the face of what I was poised to unveil. The guests, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances, clutched glasses of expensive champagne, the bubbles popping in celebration of a life built on deception. Among them, I spotted the bland, overly polished visage of his mistress, Samantha. Her laughter danced through the room, a disconcerting melody that grated against the discovery I had unveiled weeks earlier. How could she stand there, smiling, in the brightness of our past, knowing full well what her presence represented? I could feel the warmth of the stage lights wash over my skin, energizing my resolve like the sun breaks through a heavy fog. In my heart, ashes began to turn to embers, igniting a blazing inferno of vengeance that had been quietly smoldering since the revelation of his betrayal. Time felt fluid, each second a precious snowflake tumbling through the icy air, teasing me with the thrill of the unknown. As I stepped onto the stage, the somewhat sterile buzz of conversation dipped into a tentative silence. I approached the microphone, a gentle tremor in my hand contrasting with the strength swelling in my chest. The spotlight hit me like a warm embrace as I raised the glass to my lips, savoring the smooth texture and the crisp bubbles splashing against my palate. It felt like a ritual, a necessary act to prepare for the truth I was about to expose. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steadied by the exhilarating rush of adrenaline. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate my husband today. A ripple of polite claps resonated through the room, but I could see the muted wariness blooming beneath those claps. They sensed there was more behind my words than mere pleasantries. As I glanced at my husband, an unyielding mask of confidence plastered across his face, I couldn't help but feel a thrill, a fire fueled by the impending revelation. He stood at the table's edge, surrounded by patrons eager to float his ego and drown in his charisma, unaware that the skin he wore was about to unravel like cheap fabric under pressure. "My husband has been a source of inspiration for many," I continued, my voice rising with a purposeful edge, laced with a heartfelt tone dripping in irony. "We've worked hard together over the years, building not just a life but a brand, a legacy." My husband raised a glass, his eyes sparkling with joy, completely oblivious to the darkness swirling just beneath the surface. "To love," he toasted, blissfully unaware that love was the very ground I intended to shatter. And so, flushing with the bittersweet anticipation of what was to come, I grabbed the edges of the smooth mahogany podium, harnessing its comfort to ground myself amidst the swirling energy in the room. But what if... I paused, letting the silence settle, pulling them in with a mere breath. What if that brand was built on lies? What if the foundation is nothing but deceit wrapped with a pretty bow? Gasps echoed around the room like thrown stones hitting water, the delicate surface of confetti-daubed truths interrupted by ripples of shock. I could see faces morphing through oscillating emotions, curiosity, disbelief, and raw excitement flickering like stars across the night sky. Because on this day, I've decided to present to you all evidence that my husband, the man who stands before you today, has treated me as nothing more than a cash cow to fund his extravagant lifestyle. A frenzy of murmurous whispers chased through the ballroom as my words soaked into the air. My hands, trembling yet unyielding, reached for the stack of glossy prints I had meticulously gathered over the past weeks. As I brought them into the light, each photograph felt like a bullet, ready to pierce the charade he had spun. The first image blazed forth, a stark visual cascading across the projector screen I had cunningly set up behind me. It showcased my husband, arms wrapped around Samantha, her lipstick-stained lips curling into a sultry grin, not a care for the havoc we had created. Gasps of shock morphed into a collective intake of breath, akin to a fragile flower preparing to bloom under pressure. They loved to play house in lavish settings while I remained the ghost beneath the table, signing checks and awaiting promised loyalty. My heart quickened, the brisk pace of my words pushing me forward like a rushing river, cascading down an unseen curve, only to discover it wasn't love but an emotional transaction, a mere arrangement of convenience. I could feel his gaze whipping towards me, his face colored in shades of disbelief, each second tugging harder against the seams of his composure. Fear ignited in his eyes, a fire that diminished whatever defense mechanism he had constructed with masterful care. Frantic mutterings erupted behind him as the guests processed the images now flashing across the screen, pictures of hotel rooms, late-night dinners, the unmistakable likeness of the woman with whom he had carved a space in my life. It sunk into their minds, solidifying the betrayal in real time, and I reveled in the beautiful devastation my revelation was wreaking. "Someone," I teetered forward, locking my eyes on him like a predator in full strength, ready to tear down the last details of his facade. "Someone believed that my love was just a moniker for weakness," I continued, my voice dipping low, gravity embedding each syllable with weight. "But you see, I've sacrificed so much. My time, my patience, my tears poured into every moment of your great ascent. But at what cost?" In a flicker, murmurs turned into outrage, confusion mingling with empathy as I revealed more images. Moonlit dinners caught on camera by secret eyes, whispers of sweet nothings disguised in a vast sea of comfort. Each meticulous frame showcased a betrayal I had once hoped to fill with forgiveness, but no longer. He saw me as merely an asset, another tool to navigate toward his gilded destiny. I cried out, the resonance of each word filling the grand space. But I come not to bemoan my worth, but to reclaim the narrative, because, dear friends, while there's still breath in my lungs, I will expose the coward behind the curtain. I stepped back, allowing the truth to whirl within the crowd, watching as it unraveled and lit aflame the energy in the dimly lit room. Whispers turned to accusations, and I watched the crowd shift like a rushing tide, chaos bubbling beneath every gasp. Then came his fury, raw and unpolished like a newly forged weapon. "You're out of line. This is absurd." The clatter of his voice jerked against the walls, floating to every corner of the space. Yet, it felt pallid, lacking strength, grounding itself within doubt and denial, weak against the tide of truth rolling through the hall. "Absurdity?" I echoed, my voice steady amidst the rumble. "Absurd is pretending to be loyal while feathering your nest with another bird." A collection of witnesses, a sea of sympathizing nods, gasps, and hatred directed wholly at him, shimmered around us, all dramatically unfolding as if they had drawn tickets to a farce hell-bent on unraveling. "Will you dare stand here today, a king in shards, while I unleash the years of silent suffering?" I leaned closer, allowing power to seep through me like a pulse quickening against flesh, leaving him exposed, stripped raw before the onlookers who had gathered under a banner of deception. "Would you have waited this long? Tell me in the comments." I thrust out at the audience, provoking murmurs that coursed through the room as fingers nervously reached for phones, drawn to record the event that was becoming history, the downfall of a once majestic throne. In that moment, everything I had suffered over this past year pieced together into a mosaic, bright and vivid, painted with each betrayal, each sacrifice. The richness of my truth floated in the air, each note perfumed with the blessing of liberation, as I stood calmly, invincible, ready to shape my own destiny. And as I collected every ounce of his unraveling, I realized something even more powerful. Betrayal had transformed me into something indomitable, and he would never look at me the same way again. Today was my rebirth, a public reclaiming of dignity, and with it, the materials for a new beginning emerged amidst the ashes of an old one. The gentle hum of laughter and clinking glasses faded into mere echoes as I slipped away from the stage, a whirlwind of emotion spiraling within me. The faces of the crowd blurred together, no longer friends and allies, but merely fleeting silhouettes in the grand tapestry of my story. The warmth of validation tinged my skin with a glow I'd not felt in years, a bittersweet nectar flooding my senses, sweet against the bitterness of betrayal that still lingered like an unwelcome stench. 6 months passed since the spotlight had illuminated the depths of my truth, lighting up the darkness that had threatened to consume me. Each day since had felt like a stone tossed into a still pond, the ripples of consequence fanning outwards, slowly revealing the consequences of decisions made under the weight of deception. I had kept my word, declaiming my plans to expose the calamitous intricacies of his betrayal. The day after my explosive reveal, I gathered every shred of evidence I had painstakingly compiled, the emails, the photos, the secret transactions, and marched into that lawyer's office like an avenging angel, ready to reclaim not just my dignity, but my life too. As I left that office, I not only severed the final ties that bound us, but also rallied forth a plan to not just remove him from my life, but to erase any trace of the life we had built together. Without hesitation, I decided to donate everything I had previously sacrificed for him to charity. Clothes he never appreciated, diamonds that had nested ungratefully against my skin, and the ornate furnishings in our home meant to impress. Everything that signified my years as an unwitting pawn in a game fashioned around greed was released into the embrace of those who truly needed it. Each gift, wrapped with care, found itself in the hands of those whom society had overlooked. The laughter and joy in their eyes reflected the hope I'd rekindled in myself. A soft, sweet scent of lavender met my senses as I entered the community center, mingling with the sound of children playing, laughter bubbling up like fresh spring water, in stark contrast to the arid expanse that had lived within me for so long. In stark contrast, my husband stood cloaked in shadows, the consequences of his choices looming over him like a specter of regret. He sank into his own decay, stripped of the glimmer that once made him the star of every room. The opulence of his lifestyle, once sustained by my blood, sweat, and tears, had slipped through his fingers like sand through an hourglass. Silhouetted against the stark fluorescent white of the prison cell, he was a skeleton of the man he had pretended to be. A man now emerged within the walls of confinement after accusations of fraud and embezzlement unfurled, sweeping him more powerfully than a storm. I had chosen to rise, and he, to fall, each step of mine folding into a new dawn, while his descended into an abyss of despair. Just the other day, I had seen a news report flashing across the living room, the crisp sound of the television filled with hollow laughter, juxtaposed against his sallow visage. Once a shining star, now left to face the bitter truth of betrayal, the anchor had announced. Her words crisp and biting, like shards of glass left carelessly underfoot. But the spectacle had not ended there. News of his lover, that jewel of flame-haired ambition, quickly dimmed as the dollars draining from his fortune started competing with her greed. The shockwaves from my revelation had cascaded through their lives, leaving them with nothing but glimmers of past luxuries that slowly faded into memories. As the once shiny allure of his life dwindled, Samantha realized the charmed circle around him could offer no more than the stale air of crumbling society. News leaked that she had left him, chasing after the next cash cow with a flick of her perfectly manicured hands, while he wallowed in the mire of his own foul choices. The headlines yelled out, bringing me haunting pleasure, flashing the epitaph of their relationship across the very media that had once applauded their facade. Billionaire immobilized, girlfriend exits, stage left when money runs dry. Each passing month painted a clearer picture of my rebirth. I was once a woman so lost in self-doubt that I could hardly brush past the mirror without feeling the specter of his judgment on my shoulder. But now, I stood taller, my skin taut and luminous, glowing with each self-discovery. I had cultivated a new life amidst the rubble he had left behind. I filled the void he had carved out with sowings of strength, making contributions to the community, sharing warmth where previous despair had settled in. Once marred by insecurities, I was now an emanation of confidence and grace, the sunlight glancing off my fresh wardrobe adorned with colors that resonated within me. I adorned vibrant reds, deep blues accentuating the curves of my strength, fabrics buoyant enough to lift my spirits. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and in its wake, a fierce realization of self birthed. With each vast change came adventure, and each leap forward danced lightly across my skin. A sprinkle of jasmine and thyme from the farmer's market enchanted me as I strolled past stands, bursting with fresh blooms and vibrant produce. The chirping of birds welcomed the dawn as they floated upon the light breeze, the air laced with the bittersweet scent of hope rebirthing itself amidst chaos. And I relished in the sweetness of this newfound freedom. I started a charity of my own, a vision to give voices to women who found themselves shunned and ignored, offering them a haven where they could quietly reclaim their narratives. Our laughter echoed against the walls where emptiness once dwelled. We embraced our stories while sipping herbal tea that blossomed with the crisp, sweet notes of chamomile against the edges of despair. They were all so grateful, reshaping lives like mud beneath the potter's wheel, forging new paths that once felt unreachable. The remnant of what I survived echoed like a whisper through the wind, a fragile testament to strength born from suffering. I learned to love myself fiercely and unapologetically, moving forward with a new rhythm that pulsated through my veins with every adventure. But as I drifted through this rejuvenation of spirit, I could feel a rumbling in the backdrop, the bittersweet tension of a new story lurking just around the corner. My phone buzzed, the echo cutting through the serenity of my garden sanctuary. Heart racing, I picked it up, the bright glare illuminating my face, and squinted at the number flashing across the screen. It was unrecognized, but my curiosity ignited, a flutter of intrigue dancing through my heart. It was a message that would lead me down a side path I had never foreseen, one that promised an array of chaos, revelry, and perhaps a hint of danger. I know what happened to your husband. We need to talk. As I stared at the message, I felt a thrilling shiver trace the length of my spine, a chilling reminder that while one chapter had closed, another was poised at the edges, ready to unravel itself in stunning bursts of intrigue. The threads of fate woven tightly around the fabric of my reality promised much more than I could have imagined, and with that, a smile tugging at my lips, I knew I was ready for the next venture, the wild ride of chaos awaiting, with no intent of looking back.